Hey guys, let's get started. Let's get started. Last week before the reading break, I don't know if you're looking forward to that as much as I am, but then we will have 2 weeks break to catch up on all the wonderful things that we did. Time for me to catch up a little bit as well. And then we are back. This week before the week before the break, I want to spend on experiments. I want to talk to you about experiments in the social sciences, which are fascinating in my point of view. They are fascinating, and what I want to do today I just want to get you a feeling for the kind of stuff that we can actually do in the social sciences, especially when you come from a point where you did not necessarily think about experiments being used in the social sciences. Yeah. For me, they are fascinating, especially when we talk about the whole issue about causality and stuff that we talked about at the beginning. Experiments are a very powerful tool to get a better understanding of what's actually happening, right? Of what are the micromechanisms that drive things, that hold our society together, that lead to social behavior. But then even more after that, sort of what are the macro level patterns that come about when individuals behave in a certain way. So today I will use this lecture to demonstrate you and to talk about, introduce a whole bunch of different experiments that I think are fascinating, stuff that I really like. And hopefully you get a feeling for how experiments work in the social sciences. And then on Wednesday we will go back more into the details, and Wednesday will be more about the readings that you guys had for today. Yeah, about the different kinds of experiments that we can have. So when we think about experiments, we often think about these kind of things. That's actually the biggest experiment that we have right now, probably on this planet. It's the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva. It's sort of one of those particle accelerators, the biggest one in the world, where they then collide different particles and then they detect certain things. There are thousands of researchers involved in that, and they just basically simulate the beginning of the universe. It's just crazy shit. Yeah? And that's what we think about when we hear about experiments. Right? So these kind of things, or I don't know, something else. You put something together, you blow something up, you experiment around, and that's sort of maybe you had a little experiment tool set like that, and that's sort of what you associate with experiments. But there are, we already talked about experimental designs. You can use an experimental design in the social sciences as well, and this is where, in my view, it becomes really, really fascinating. I played an experiment with you guys. Well, I'm playing a lot of experiments with you guys that you don't really know. But you saw this one. You saw this one. That was an experiment. I split the room in half. One of you guys answered one set of questions. The other set of you answered another set of questions. And in fact, you even answered the same question. This sort of was the same question that I gave you. The only difference was the question order, right? Like the one group, I gave another question first. There was the question about, I don't know, should the government of Ireland spend money on universities and education and schools, while the other group, I gave you that question afterwards. That was an experimental design. And you see already how straightforward these things are, and how very clear. You see a result. The only difference is that I gave the one group the question before and the other one the question after, right? And there was, I don't see any reason why this one side of the room should be more in favor of water charges than the other side of the room. Right? So that's sort of the idea of experiments to isolate certain effects. In this case, it was the effect of question ordering, or I also had this, with the question wording, where I gave you a slightly different clue about how much water charges you pay, whether it is 160 euros per year or 13.30 euros per month, which adds up to the same sum, but still we got vastly different results. Yeah? So that was already, that was a survey experiment. And we will come back to that on Wednesday as well. But it already gives you the general idea of experiments, right? You have a blue pill and you have a red pill, and there you go. And then you see what happens. So that's sort of in a nutshell what experiments are. There's much more around that. But because of that, because this is so simple in a certain way, and so straightforward about what is sort of driving things, and we really know what is sort of the cause and the effect here, right? Because we give some people the pill and we don't give them to others, or we give them another one and so on. Because of that, it's also considered the gold standard in research in general, but even I think in the social sciences, when we want to know about individual behaviors. And then eventually how this leads to a social phenomenon that we observe. Okay, so what I prepared for today, so as I said, I just want to give you a feeling for all sorts of different studies where people used experiments that I really enjoy, that I really like, so that you kind of see how this actually looks like. Okay, in the first set of, the first thing I want to do with you, I'm actually going to show you a video that is a little long. That's sort of a 15-minute video. And it's not the best experiment from a design point of view, but it's used in an educational context. Right? And maybe this kind of could be useful for some of you. Not all of you are going to be researchers at the end of the day. But it's also extremely, extremely powerful. So that's sort of why I decided to show you the whole thing. Well, actually, the whole thing is an hour-long documentary, but this is sort of 15 minutes out of that I think is extremely, extremely powerful in terms of the whole context of racism, discrimination, and so on. But there is an experiment happening there. That's sort of how it fits into it. Then the second one is sort of a set of studies, experiments related to the whole idea of broken windows. I'll come back to that later on, but it's basically this idea that when you see your environment deteriorating, you're more likely to rebel yourself, right? And so that as soon as there's one window broken, other people start throwing other stones, and more windows get broken, and so on. It's this whole idea about zero tolerance in policing, where this comes from. There's a theoretical idea behind this. And actually there's evidence for that, and there's amazing experimental evidence for that people really break the norms as soon as they see other norms being broken. Right? So once the floodgates are open, they go crazy, and you see dramatic effects with this set of studies that some of my colleagues in the Netherlands did. And then there are some other studies about cultural markers where people set up, basically studied social influence with over 20,000 people and kind of noticed how the information that is being displayed to people in terms of what are sort of the highest ranked songs, in this case it was about downloading free songs, how that actually leads to self-fulfilling prophecies, where at the end of the day, the songs that were sort of seemed to be the most successful ones actually became the most successful ones. And they did fascinating experiments around that as well. And lastly, if you have some time, some colleague of mine seriously did some experiments with undergraduates, with folks like you. They invited them in, told them it's about a study on aesthetic tastes in different domains. They gave them different wines. They could drink 3 different wines. And then the point of this experiment was not only was there conformity in terms of what they thought was sort of the good wines, when in fact they were completely crappy. In fact, there was wine tainted with vinegar. But on the top of that, they actually showed that people started to enforce a false norm. So people started to point the fingers at others who said that the wine with the vinegar was false, when lots of other people kind of didn't say that. So then basically it's this whole idea of the naked emperor. You know the story, the children's story as the naked emperor. And there are these three rogues that tell him that there's a beautiful new dress, but only the intelligent people can see it. Right? And then the emperor says, doesn't want to admit that he cannot see it, right? Because he would admit that he's stupid. So he says, "Oh, it's so beautiful, it's so great, right?" And then everybody kind of praises the emperor for his new clothes, when in fact the guy is running around naked. And at some point, the children laughs at him and says, "Hang on, there are no clothes at all." So it's this whole idea about norms and being enforced, and there were some fascinating studies about that. But let me first get started with this video that I want to show you. So I'm going to plug over to get you some sound for this. And you can watch the full documentary on PBS Frontline. I uploaded the link to Blackboard as well, so you can click on this one as well. It's a documentary. Originally, the documentary is from the 1970s, and the backdrop of this, you have to think that this was after the shooting of Martin Luther King in the United States. And there was an experiment that was not conducted by researchers, not conducted by folks like me, but by a high school teacher in Iowa, in the middle of Iowa, Riceville, Iowa. And she wanted to demonstrate to her third graders what discrimination is. Yeah? And so she used an experimental setup for that, and repeated that, and then at some point there were cameras there, and that's what you're going to see. But that's sort of the background of that in the 1970s. So let me plug this over and change the sound, and then let's get this started.
You'll begin to notice today that we spend a great deal of time waiting for brown-eyed people Yardstick strong. Well, okay. I don't see yardstick to me. Hey, this is the key on your desk. So the writing five is beyond this. Oh! You think if the brown-eyed people get out of hand, that would be the thing to do? Who goes first to lunch? The blue-eyed people. No brown-eyed people go back for seconds. Blue-eyed people may go back for seconds. Brown-eyed people do not. Don't you know? They're not smart. Is that the only reason? It might take too much. Okay, quiet. Everything bad is happening to us. The way they treated you felt like they didn't even want to try to do anything. Seemed like this is how it was taking our best friends away from us. What happened at recess? Were two of you boys fighting? Yeah. What happened, John? Russell called me names and I hit him in the gut. What did he call you? Brown eyes. You call him brown eyes? They always call us that. In all the always call us brown eyes. Brown eyes. Then they would call us blue eyes. I called him Sandy and Donner. Yeah. What's wrong with being called brown eyes? It means that we're stupid and not there. Oh, that's just same way as other people call black people niggers. Is that the reason you hate him now? Did it help? Or did it stop it? Did it make you feel better inside? Did it make you feel better inside? Did it make you feel better to call him brown eyes? Why are you supposed to call him brown eyes? Because he's brown eyes. Is that the only reason you didn't call him brown eyes yesterday? He had brown eyes yesterday. Did we get some? Yeah, I said we put those blue flavors on the teasing. Oh, is this teasing? No. Well, he did it. Were you doing it for fun, to be funny, or were you doing it to be mean? I don't know. Don't ask me. Did anyone laugh? I watched what had been marvelous, cooperative, wonderful, thoughtful children turn into nasty, vicious, discriminating, predators in the space of 15 minutes. Yesterday, I told you that brown-eyed people aren't as good as blue-eyed people. That wasn't true. I lied to you yesterday. The truth is that brown-eyed people are better than blue-eyed people. Russell, where are your glasses? I forgot them. You forgot them, and what color are your eyes? Blue. Susan Ginder has brown eyes. She didn't forget her glasses. Russell Ring has blue eyes, and what about his glasses? He forgot them. Yesterday we were visiting, and Greg said, "Boy, I like to hit my little sister as hard as I can. That's fun." What does that tell you about blue-eyed people? The brown-eyed people may take off their collars, and each of you will put your collar on a blue-eyed person. Brown-eyed people get 5 extra minutes of recess. You blue-eyed people are not allowed to be on the playground equipment at any time. You blue-eyed people are not to play with the brown-eyed people. Brown-eyed people are better than blue-eyed people. They're smarter than blue-eyed people. And if you don't believe it, look at Brian. Do blue-eyed people know how to sit in a chair?
people learn fast. Very good. Greg, what did you do with that cup? Will you please go and get that cup and put your name on it and keep it at your desk? Blue-eyed people are wasteful. Do you want to be kind this morning? I use what you know in the phonics, we use the card pad. And the children, the brown-eyed children, were in the whole class the first day, and it took them 5.5 minutes to get through the card pad. The second day, it took them 2.5 minutes. The only thing that had changed was the fact that now they were superior people. You're ready faster than I've ever had anyone go through the card pad. Why couldn't you get them yesterday? You made the collars get thinking about the collars. Oh, and you couldn't think as well with the collars on. 4 minutes and 18 seconds. How long did it take you yesterday? 3 minutes. 3 minutes. How long did it take you today? 4 minutes and 18 seconds. What happened? Why? What are you thinking of? This. I hate today. I hate too. Because I'm blue-eyed. There's nothing, it's not funny, it's not fun, it's not pleasant. This is a filthy, nasty word called discrimination. We're treating people a certain way because they are different from the rest of us. Is that fair? No. Nothing fair about it. We didn't say this was going to be a fair day, did we? No. And it isn't. It's a horrid day. You ready? What did you do, people who are wearing blue collars now, find out today? I did yesterday. I did too. How did they feel yesterday? Down like a dog on a leash. Yeah. Because they are chasing them up in the prison. They're chasing them up in the prison. They're throwing kids. Should the color of some other person's eyes have anything to do with how you treat them? No. All right, then should the color of their skin? No. Should you judge people by the color of their skin? No. You're going to say that today, and this week, and probably all the time you're in this room. You'll say, no, Mrs. Ellie. Every time I ask that question. Then, when you see a black man, or an Indian, or someone walking down the street, are you going to say, look at that, so lovely? No. Does it make any difference whether their skin is black or white? No. Or yellow? No. Or red? No. Is that how you decide whether people are good or bad? Is that what makes people good or bad? Let's take these collars off. What would you like to do with them? Go ahead. Now you know a little bit more than you knew at the beginning of this week. Do you know a little bit more than you wanted to? This isn't an easy way to learn this, is it? Okay, now let's all sit down here together. Blue eyes and brown eyes. Does it make any difference what color you are? Down. Okay, ready for the time? Okay, now are you back? Does the color of eyes that you have make any difference in the kind of person you are?
Okay. So I think this is a very, very powerful scene, right? When you see this for the first time, you go, wow. Right? Besides the fact that if you would do this nowadays, God wouldn't pass any ethical board by any standards. Probably he would have a shitstorm the next day. He would have to resign. Also, well, these were sort of the 70s. They just did these things. But it's incredibly, incredibly powerful. Incredibly powerful demonstration of discrimination, racism, in a way that even captivates us, as viewers. And it was not an academic. It was a high school teacher that sort of played this. Actually, this was when you watch the full documentary. The full documentary revisits those kids, like 50 years later, to talk about them, how this actually impacted their life, and what they think now about this. And actually, Jane Elliott, she was sort of she became popular after this became there was the first documentary in the 1970s, In the Eye of the Storm, and then this other one, A Class Divided, in the 1980s, and she repeated this experiment with in a New York prison with the guards. Was it New York? I don't know, one of those New England states up there, with prison guards, where they kind of were kind of separated. They only knew that this would be a day-long workshop, and they were separated. And it's fascinating, even there, with adults, with people who should be aware of these kind of things. It's very interesting to watch. So that's sort of part of this documentary at the end of it. So, but how is this now relevant for us? This is sort of an experiment in a more educational context. From a research point of view, there are far too many moving parts in this. There are a lot of moving parts in this. So this wouldn't fly as an experiment if you would want to do some research. For example, the teacher, I don't know, she says sometimes this, sometimes she says that. So there's sort of a lot of other things that could influence the results and the findings that we have. In experiments, we want to control as much as possible and then change one thing, right? Like have questions exactly the same, but one thing different, and then we sort of see the difference between the two. But when we look at how the setup here looks, right? So there's the teacher, there's sort of the students, and then kind of there are these two conditions that are being spread out, right? For the one, it's sort of the blue-eyed are better, and the brown-eyed are worse. And then at the end, what I found fascinating was, remember, there was this part at the end where she did these exercises with them about these card packs, and then I thought it was crazy, that those kids that are sort of the inferior group the first day, it took them 5 minutes, and the second day it took them 2.5. While the other ones that were told that they are the superior ones the first day, they did it in 3 minutes the first day. And the second day, when they were told they are the inferior ones, it took them 4 minutes to go through it. Right? And that's sort of how these experiments often look like. Kind of put people in different conditions. I kind of put this part of the lecture theater in one condition, and I put this part of the lecture theater in another condition. And at the end, I kind of measure something on both, right? And then I compare these two things. Like, and this could be the time for completion, or what I did, it was how much you guys agree with the statement that water charges are fair. And then we compare these things. And then, if everything else was controlled, we know that it is this treatment that is kind of responsible for this thing. Because often that's the problem in the social sciences. There's so many things that matter, so many things that kind of play a role in as well, right? And I could always say, remember how we started off. Like I said, that you guys should be able to think of alternative explanations of things all the time, right? And we can work very hard to kind of try to get to these alternative explanations and rule them out, knock them out, and so on. But with experiments, we can actually control that, right? So if we have two settings that are exactly the same thing, and then we only change them on one tiny thing, then we know whatever is sort of the changes must be caused by this treatment that we had before. Right? So that's sort of the setup, and you will see different sort of setups when I talk you through these other experiments that I want to talk about. Okay, so that is sort of the class divided. I can highly recommend watching the full documentary. It's on Blackboard. Let's move on to broken windows. Broken windows. Broken windows is something that fascinates me as well. It's this idea, people, the first guy who actually had it was a social psychologist, Zimbardo, who parked a car in the Bronx and within 24 minutes the car disintegrated, just disappeared. While he parked the same car in the same condition in Palo Alto, the Stanford campus, just stood there for weeks, nothing happened. The idea here was, and later on people picked up on this, so it's associated with those guys, Wilson and Kelling, broken window theory. They suggest that signs of disorder, like broken windows, litter, and graffiti, induce other types of disorder and petty crime. It was thought that removing these signs of disorder would take away an important trigger of criminal behavior. And in fact, this kind of thinking, in the 1980s and 90s and so on, this really became how cities and police sort of went about doing their business, right? So one of the things that we observe, it's one of the things that people are so puzzled by, but this is sort of one of the explanations for that, is that in the 1990s, something happened with the criminals in the States. Especially in New York, the crime rate completely dropped down. People were just astonished. What happened? What had happened here? Where are all the criminals gone, right? Well, there are sort of these folk explanations a little bit, like, I don't know, maybe you came across a Freakonomics book. There they say it's about the introduction of the birth control pill 2 decades before. But another equally fascinating and I think here very powerful explanation is the broken window theory. That kind of there was a crackdown, a zero tolerance towards even the smallest kind of crime, and you would pee in the corner, you would go to prison, right? These kind of things. While the bigger issues were sort of huge drug business, murder, and things like that. You wonder how are these things associated with each other, right? But the idea here in this theory is that this one, littering, throwing something away, leads to that on the other side. And then you do it, the norm, you break the norm, you signal to others that apparently it seems to be all right to break the norm. Others follow suit, and that's sort of what we find at the end of the day. Right? It's a very fascinating theory, especially in this whole analytical sociology thingy that I do, where social influence plays a huge role. But how can we actually study this? How can we study this? Is it actually true? Right? Instead of breaking one norm leads to breaking of other norms as well. Okay, so there's some folks in the Netherlands. A good friend of mine, he's a professor at the Rijks University in Groningen, and there were some other folks there. They have a very good sociology department. They did 4 fascinating, well actually they did 6, but now I'm only going to talk about 4. They did 4 very fascinating experiments to look at that. Right? How sort of norms can erode. How norms can erode and how throwing one stone can lead to the whole thing breaking down. Right, and this is sort of stuff, it was published in Science. Some of the sociology stuff gets published in Science, the really good stuff. So they had 4 different experiments that I'm going to talk about: graffiti, bikes, shopping carts, and mailboxes. And these are all field experiments, right? So like they do an experimental setup in the field out there somewhere. It's not in a laboratory in an extremely highly controlled situation, which is, we'll talk about that on Wednesday. There's a lot of criticism towards that, because when you bring in people into a very controlled environment, here at the university, you can do this or that, then you could argue that this is far removed from the real world, right? But these sort of things, they are absolutely in the real world. And the question that they had was, this was the guiding question, like does giving cues that one norm is broken, and they called that the contextual norm, so the contextual norm is broken, does that lead to other norms being broken? That's what they call the target norm. Okay, so the first thing where they looked at, actually in a bunch of experiments, they looked at this littering, throwing something away, throwing something on the floor. And we are in the Netherlands after all, so everybody is cycling around on their bikes, right? People have their bikes everywhere. So what those guys actually did, they kind of put little flyers, they strapped it on people's bikes. And it was a really crappy flyer that was sort of from a fake company that said, we wish everybody happy holidays. It's like you would arrive at your bike and there's sort of a little flyer attached to it. What are you going to do with it? There was no litter box nearby, right? So either people would basically take this away and stash it somewhere, or they would just throw it on the floor. Right? And at the end, that's sort of what they looked at. They looked at how many people do throw this crappy little flyer onto the floor. That was sort of their target norm, right? Like not throwing something on the floor, not littering. What was the contextual norm that they had? And this is sort of where it becomes interesting, because they actually used graffiti. So these were researchers like me, and on a Saturday evening, they got paid, they got research money to spray graffiti at a wall. That's what they did. And here's sort of how the setup looks like. So this was sort of just outside of the sociology department in Groningen. Yeah, people parked their bikes, and there you already see, they attach these flyers. You see them, the white little pieces of paper. They had them attached to these bikes. And now the first one, they called that the order condition. It was just the clean wall, and there were the bikes, right, attached with these flyers. And then, at the weekend on a Saturday evening, they went out there, and those guys who wrote this paper, they did some crappy graffiti up there, right? They even described that they kind of worked hard to make this look really crappy, right? So that it's not being falsely considered art. There can be some beautiful graffiti, but this one here, then on the other side, there was some graffiti at the wall. They painted that wall. It was what they called the disorder condition. And then, they had people standing around watching how many people throw flyers onto the floor. That was the whole setup, right? You see how this goes. Now, when we think about how we portrayed this before, we had these flyers attached to the bikes, and then we have these two conditions, right, where we move off. One is the order condition, no graffiti at the wall, and the other one is disorder condition, graffiti at the wall. At the end, in both setups, they counted how many people throw the flyer on the floor, right? What is the result? Well, it was a big difference. It's a big difference. So in the order condition, 33% of the people threw the flyer on the floor. In the disorder condition, just by having this graffiti at the wall. It was nothing about not throwing a flyer at the wall, right? It was something else. It was another norm that was obviously violated, right? That's sort of what we call the contextual norm. And as a consequence of that, much more people threw the flyer onto the floor, right? And you see how these two setups are exactly the same. Well, of course, you could argue, did they do it at the exact same time? So if you look at it, they would have to do it on the same day, make sure that they're sort of similar kind of people, that there's no other biases in there involved, because you cannot have these things happen exactly at the same time, at exactly the same spot, right? That's sort of a problem that we have. But in this case, just this graffiti at the wall led to a lot of people, literally. Okay. So they did some other experiments along these lines. They are all along these lines, where sort of a contextual norm is being set up. It's obviously being broken, and then they see if in the setup, in the treatment where people break the contextual norm, if they also break the target norm. So the second setup that they had was a parking lot. Yeah. So basically, there was a parking lot in Groningen somewhere. People parked their bikes, and they had actually put up a fence around this parking lot. And that was sort of their study design. And then there were sort of two signs that they put out here. The first one, geen doorgang, that's sort of Dutch for no trespassing. You're not allowed to walk through here. But what they did, they kind of left a little gap into this fence. You see, it's sort of open, like, I don't know, less than 50 centimeters in there, so you could squeeze through, go to your car. Alternatively, you would have to walk 200 meters around to get to your car. So that's sort of the target norm here. And do people break the norm when there is an obvious sign that they shouldn't walk through here? Like an ordinance, like something official, not like something that we I don't know, we just think that we shouldn't throw a flyer at the floor, but something that is sort of official. And then next to it, you see this other sign, geen fietsen, aanheffing, vastmaken, whatever. My Dutch is a little rusty. And it means don't attach bikes to the fence. Right? You're not allowed to lock your bike to this fence. So the target norm, no trespassing, and then the contextual norm that they deliberately broke was kind of attaching bikes to this fence, although there was a clear sign that you shouldn't do that. Right? So again, we had sort of a similar setup, like the order condition. What they did there, they parked a few bikes just a meter away from those fence, locked them. And they had the disorder condition, where they had these 4 bikes that they used locked to the fence directly, breaking the norm. Here we are. That's sort of the setup. There's always a setup for an experiment. Sometimes it's a little more complicated because you have a few more conditions. But in the basic setup, it's always like that. You have something like a control condition and a treatment condition. Right? And here we have the order condition. 4 bikes stand 1 meter away from the fence and are locked. And the disorder condition, 4 bikes locked to the fence, despite the sign that that is prohibited. And then, they had somebody standing there, student assistant, counting how many people walked through the fence. Yeah. through this gap in the fence. And what was the result? Again, look at that, huge difference. So in the order condition, only 27% of the people walked through this gap, while when there was a bike attached to this, and there was nothing about not walking through or other people walking through and so on, they were all independent from each other, the people that walked through, over 80% of the people walked through. So again, it's sort of this thing where sort of one contextual norm was broken, and then a target norm was broken in consequence as well. So sort of the floodgates were open, and then people thought, so okay, now we can do everything, and here we go. But again, very convincing evidence. This is very clear. You can do some statistical analysis and crap on this, but it's very obvious. This is significant. There's sort of a clear difference between these two conditions. Okay, so they had a third one. Let me talk about the third one, where they played a similar thing in a parking garage. And again, it was about a flyer that they attached to the cars that were parking there. Well, it was a parking garage that belonged to there was a supermarket and a fitness gym next to it. And they sneaked in and put the flyers under the windshields of the cars that were parked there. So the target norm that they looked at, and at the end they counted again how many flyers are on the floor. Right? How many people throw it away. How did they set up the contextual norm here? Well, they set it up through unreturned shopping carts. So they had this one condition, the disorder condition, where they had these 4 shopping carts just standing unreturned in this parking lot, while there were signs that you should return it. So there's nothing about a flyer not throwing it on the floor, right? But something completely else. While in the other setup, in the order condition, there were no shopping carts. They were all returned. And they were just the carts there. Okay, you see how this works out. Again, they have sort of their order condition or the control condition in the treatment, the disorder on the other side. This is sort of how the setup looks like. Right? People get flyers attached to their cars. They get funneled off into 2 different conditions. And some guys, they end up in the order condition where there are no shopping carts around, while the other guys end up in the disorder condition where there are these 4 unreturned shopping carts around, and at the end they count the number of flyers that are on the floor. What is the result? Again, very straightforward. That's sort of why this study, I like it, because it's so simple. It's so simple, so straightforward. We can all understand it, right? And there's no fancy statistics needed or anything. It's really just, okay, there's this one condition and the other one, and the difference must be due to the treatment that we apply. So there's much more littering when these shopping carts stand around. Okay, the fourth one that I actually like the most. They set up something like this, that the target norm was stealing. So they went to a public mailbox, and they kind of put in an envelope, just like this. It was sticking out, and there was sort of a little window in here, and there was sort of money shining through this. Well, they said they used fake money, and they couldn't afford it to have kind of, they were not that well funded to use real money here. So there was fake money, and the guy who did it, they actually had some difficulties getting the fake money look real, right? But it was part of science, part of the research. And so that's sort of how they left it, right? So imagine you walk by a mailbox, a public mailbox, and there's an envelope sticking out, and you can see some money. Are you going to steal it? Are you going to take it away? That's what they did. Okay, so that was sort of the target norm. How many people steal this envelope? How many people open the envelope, take the money, and go away? What were the conditions? Well, actually, in this case, they had 3 conditions. One was order. It was nothing. It was just a clean mailbox, right? And the envelope was sticking out. The second one is they put some litter around the mailbox, some rubbish, right? Immediately next to the mailbox. And the third one, they had some littering around the mailbox, and they put some graffiti on the mailbox. Again, how cool is that? To get paid to put some graffiti on the mailbox and right? And that was sort of their disorder condition that they had. When we look at the setup, it's very similar, and now you already get to the sort of the basics of experiments. We'll talk more about these things on Wednesday, how they kind of funnel off the order condition and the disorder condition, control and treatment, and then they compare how many people actually steal the envelope. And this sort of what the findings were. Well, almost twice as many people stole the stuff when there was littering around. or when there was a graffiti on it, on the mailbox. So that's, I think, very, very powerful stuff. When there was littering and graffiti around the mailbox, more people stole the envelope. So that's sort of this broken window stuff, it's fascinating in itself, but I wanted to use that to show you how field experiments work. Let me show you one other study. Let me quickly walk you through that. It's on cultural markets. Again, this stuff ended up in science. When you do that kind of clear stuff, it ends up in science. It's really, the best outlets you can end up in the academic business. So there were these guys. I think I had talked about Duncan Watts as well. He's one of my heroes. He was involved in the study at Columbia, where they had created a fake website where participants could listen to and rate and download songs by unknown bands. And it's not just a small number of people, right? So here they had over 16,000 people participating in this. This was sort of an experiment in the internet, and there's a virtual laboratory. It's like kind of like a fake Spotify. At the time, it didn't exist. It was 10 years ago. Spotify didn't exist at the time, and they could control this website. And what they did was the following. So for a subset of people, they actually told them what other people downloaded. They basically gave them a charts list and exact the name or the number of downloads and the number of ratings that other songs had received by other people before. While in the control condition, they didn't do it. And at the end, they kind of looked at how did people rate these songs and how many times did they download a certain song, right? Actually, they went even further. They have different virtual worlds, but we can talk about that on Wednesday, because that's sort of sometimes a criticism that you need to have separate different treatment conditions. And the finding that I want to stress here is, as soon as people knew about the downloads of others, the songs that were sort of popular in that context became even more popular. So social influence greatly mattered. Social influence greatly mattered for what people thought is a good song, right? And then eventually downloaded it as well. But they also did this other thing, which is sort of fascinating, where they inverted the ratings, right? So they had sort of the best song. That's sort of now you see on the x-axis the number of people that participated in this, and on the y-axis you see the number of downloads that songs received. And now you see sort of the most popular song. That's the song that goes up, and you see the least popular song. That's sort of the flat one here. And then what they did at some point, they just flipped the ratings around. They pretended they gave the song number one the ratings and the download numbers of the least popular song. And they gave the least popular song the ratings and the download numbers of the most popular song. And what happened is that this really diverged, right? So as soon as people thought that the one song that was actually the crappy song was the most popular song, more people actually rated it highly in consequence. And more people downloaded it afterwards. So that's sort of what you see how actually social influence, this is what we call self-fulfilling prophecy, with this sort of where unpopular song became popular by people thinking that they are popular. Reading for Wednesday, however, if you want to catch up on the stuff that I talked about this disorder and broken window stuff, that's a paper by Kaiser, and the other one is the one by Salganik et al. It's on BlackBerry.